The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 standard years before humanity stumbled into the stars. In all that time, the various species of the known universe had developed certain rules. Some were written in the great law books that filled entire space stations. Others were passed down through generations as warnings, whispered from elder to youth like sacred prayers. Commander Hal of the species stood at the observation deck of Station Meridian 7, his 4 arms folded across his chest in what humans had come to recognize as deep thought. His scaled skin shifted colors slightly, moving from deep purple to troubled blue. Behind him, the station hummed with the activity of 1,000 different species going about their daily business. Merchants haggled over rare minerals. Scientists debated the properties of newly discovered elements. Diplomats argued about trade routes and territorial boundaries. And somewhere in the lower levels, humans were drinking. Hal had served in the Galactic Defense Force for over 300 years. He had seen wars that consumed entire star systems. He had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. He had stood against pirates, smugglers, and creatures from the dark spaces between galaxies. Nothing had prepared him for humans. When Earth had first been discovered, the scientific community had been fascinated. Here was a planet that by all rights should have been uninhabitable. The gravity was crushing by galactic standards. The atmosphere contained a gas so corrosive that most species needed special equipment just to breathe it. The surface was covered in water that could dissolve almost anything given enough time. Extreme temperature variations, violent weather patterns, and a star that bombarded the surface with radiation made Earth a nightmare world. And yet somehow life had not only survived there but had thrived, evolved, become intelligent. The Council had debated for months about whether to make contact. Some argued that any species capable of surviving on such a world must be incredibly dangerous. Others suggested that precisely because of their harsh, humans might bring valuable perspectives to the galactic community. In the end, curiosity won out over caution. That decision had changed everything. Hal remembered the first human he had ever met, a small female named Sarah who had been part of the diplomatic mission. She had been polite, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about other species. He had thought perhaps the fears about humans were exaggerated. Then came the incident with the raiders. They were a species known throughout the galaxy for their ferocity. 8 feet tall, covered in armored plates with claws that could tear through standard hull plating. They had attacked a human colony ship, expecting easy prey. The distress signal had gone out, and by the time the Galactic Defense Force arrived, they expected to find nothing but debris and bodies. Instead, they found the ship disabled and drifting. Inside, the entire raiding party had been killed, not with advanced weapons or clever traps, but in close combat. The human colonists, armed with nothing more than improvised tools and what they called determination, had fought back. The security footage showed humans taking wounds that would have killed most species 3 times over and simply continuing to fight. One human male had been stabbed completely through the torso and had used that moment of closeness to break his attacker's neck. After that day, the phrase had taken on new meaning. The Galactic Council had quickly added new guidelines to their ancient rulebooks, regulations about human involvement in certain activities, warnings about their unique physiology, and one particular advisory that Hal had seen posted in every station, every ship, every outpost across the known galaxy. If a ever says, "Hold my beer," leave the building immediately. The phrase itself had confused the translation algorithms for months. Beer, it turned out, was a fermented beverage that humans consumed recreationally. The fact that they willingly ingested something toxic enough to impair their already terrifying capabilities was disturbing enough. But the real danger was what the phrase represented. When a human said those 4 words, it meant they were about to do something so reckless, so dangerous, so absolutely insane that even they recognized the need to free up their hands. It was a declaration of intent, a warning that all bets were off, and that the laws of probability were about to be violated in spectacular fashion. Hal's communicator buzzed. He tapped the device with one of his upper hands and held it to the audio receptor on the side of his head. "Commander," the voice of Lieutenant Al came through, slightly distorted by static. "We have a situation in docking bay 17. "What kind of situation?" There was a pause, the kind of pause that made Hal's scales shift to a darker shade of blue. "The humankind, sir." Hal closed all four of his eyes and took a deep breath. Of course it was. It was always the humankind these days. "Details," he said, already moving toward the nearest transport tube. "A cargo ship arrived about 2 hours ago. Standard trading run, nothing unusual. But they've been having some kind of dispute with a human crew that was already docked." "A dispute about what?" "Near as we can tell, sir, it started over a game." The transport tube doors opened, and Hal stepped inside, inputting the coordinates for docking bay 17. The tube accelerated smoothly, carrying him through the vast interior of the station. "A game," he repeated flatly. "Yes, sir. The humans call it darts. You throw small pointed objects at a circular target." "And the took offense." "Actually, sir, the one. Then they made some comments about human hand-eye coordination being overrated. Then one of the humans said, well..." Hal's scales went from blue to pale gray. "Hold my beer." "That's the phrase, sir." The transport tube came to a stop and the doors slid open. Hal could already hear the commotion. Shouts in multiple languages, the crash of objects being thrown, and underneath it all, a sound that made his blood run cold. Human laughter. He pushed through the crowd that had gathered at the entrance to the bay. Station security was there, a mix of and officers, all keeping a careful distance from the chaos unfolding before them. None of them were willing to intervene. At the center of the bay stood a human male. He was not particularly large by human standards, maybe 6 feet tall with a lean build. His head was shaved and his skin was dark brown. He wore the standard jumpsuit of a freight crew with the name Jackson stitched across the chest. In his hands he held what appeared to be a standard cargo loading hook, the kind used to move heavy containers. Around him lay the unconscious forms of 4. Each of them was easily twice the human size, with thick muscular bodies and tusks that could gore through metal. They were known throughout the galaxy as excellent fighters. And this single human had put them all on the ground. "You done?" Jackson asked, looking at the 5th who was circling him warily. His voice was calm, almost friendly, like he was asking if someone wanted more coffee. The roared and charged. Its massive fist came down in a blow that should have crushed the human into paste. Jackson was not there. He had moved with that unsettling speed that possessed, the product of evolving on a planet where everything was trying to kill you. The loading hook came up in a smooth arc and caught the right in the joint of his leg. The alien went down hard, and before he could rise, Jackson had wrapped an arm around his throat. "Easy," Jackson said, applying pressure with the kind of expert precision that suggested he had done this many times before. "Just go to sleep. This doesn't have to get any worse." The thrashed for a few seconds, then went limp. Jackson released him and straightened up, brushing dust from his jumpsuit as if he had just finished a mildly strenuous workout, rather than incapacitating 5 beings nearly twice his size. "Anyone else want to talk about my hand-eye coordination?" Silence from the watching crowd. Hal pushed forward. "Jackson, human designation Jackson." The human turned. Up close, his eyes held that peculiar intensity that all humans seem to possess, the look of a predator pretending to be prey. "That's me, and you must be the law around here. Look, before you say anything, they started it." "I don't care who started it," Hal said. "I care about the fact that you just assaulted 5 citizens of the Trade Federation." Jackson shrugged. They were pretty insistent about the assault part. I just finished what they started. One of the unconscious groaned and tried to sit up. Jackson glanced at him with a look that made the alien reconsider and lie back down. There are procedures, Hal said. Complaints to file, security to call, you don't just. He stopped, searching for the right words. Beat the tar out of everyone who offends you. Exactly. Jackson picked up something from a nearby table. It was a glass container filled with amber liquid. Beer, Hal recognized. The human took a long drink. See, here's the thing, Commander. I'm familiar with your procedures. I've read all the regulations. And I know that if I had filed a complaint, your security officers would have politely told me that verbal provocation isn't grounds for official action. They would have walked away feeling pretty good about themselves. And the next human they ran into might not have been as good at handling himself as I am. So this was what? A teaching moment. Jackson smiled. It was not a nice smile. Something like that. Word gets around in the trading lanes. After tonight, the Trade Federation is going to be a lot more polite to human crews, and nobody had to die to learn that lesson. Hal wanted to argue. He wanted to enforce the rules, to maintain order, to uphold the principles that had kept galactic civilization functioning for. But he also knew that Jackson was right. They would not make an official complaint. They were too proud to admit that a single human had defeated 5 of their warriors, and the human had been careful not to cause any permanent damage. I should detain you, he said. You should, Jackson agreed. But you won't, because detaining me means paperwork. It means explaining to your superiors why a simple bar fight turned into an incident. It means dealing with the human embassy and their lawyers, and most importantly. He leaned closer, and Hal fought the urge to step back. It means admitting that you couldn't handle one. The silence stretched between them. Around them the crowd watched, waiting to see what would happen. Finally, Hal turned to his officers. Get medical attention for the. Log this as a training accident in the cargo bay. Faulty equipment. His officers exchanged glances, but knew better than to question him publicly. Jackson raised his glass in a mock salute. Thanks, Commander. You won't regret this. I already do, Hal muttered as he walked away. Behind him, he heard Jackson calling out to his crew, something about finishing their game. The laughter that followed was the sound of predators who knew exactly how dangerous they were, and found endless amusement in the fact that the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to understand. That night Hal added a personal note to his duty log. In 12,000 years of galactic civilization, we have encountered many dangerous species, conquerors and destroyers, hive minds and psychic predators. None of them fright me the way humans do, because the others know they are dangerous. Humans pretend they are not. And when they stop pretending, when they say those 4 words and set down their drinks, the wise among us run. He saved the entry and stared out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity was spreading, growing, learning, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months later, the phrase would be tested in a way that nobody expected. But that night, on Station Meridian 7, a single human had reminded everyone of an important truth. We're not to be provoked. And when one of them said, "Hold my beer," the only sensible response was to leave the building as quickly as possible and pray to whatever gods you believed in that you were not part of whatever came next. The warning signs had been posted. The rules had been written. But the galaxy, as it would soon discover, was still not ready for what humanity could do when they really meant it. The first of many lessons was just beginning. The emergency beacon pulsed through the void of space like a dying heartbeat. Its signal carried across light years, bouncing off relay stations and cutting through the cosmic static until it reached the communication arrays of the Galactic Defense Force headquarters. Admiral Eth of the Meridian Fleet sat in his command chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the current state of galactic traffic. His species, the were known for their analytical minds and calm temperaments. They had served as the primary strategists of the galactic military for over 8,000 years. In all that time, Eth had never encountered a problem he could not solve through careful planning and superior tactics. Until humans arrived. The signal coordinates showed a location in the outer rim, near the border of what the maps officially called unclaimed space. Everyone knew the truth. That region belonged to the Void Collective. The Void Collective was not a species in the traditional sense. They were a merger of machine and flesh, a cybernetic civilization that had rejected the organic limitations of their original forms countless generations ago. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They consumed. Entire worlds had been stripped of their resources to feed the collective's endless expansion. Billions of lives had been lost trying to contain them. The galactic community had eventually settled on a policy of containment. Stay out of their territory and they would mostly stay out of yours. It was not a perfect solution, but it was better than the alternative. Someone had apparently not got that message. The signal identifies as the cargo vessel Wandering Star, Eth's communications officer reported. Registry shows it as an independent freighter, primarily human crew. What were they doing in collective space? Unknown, Admiral. The transmission is badly corrupted. I'm only getting fragments. Eth studied the display. The Wandering Star was deep inside enemy territory, far past the warning beacons that marked the boundary of collective influence. Either they had gotten lost on a scale that probability, or they had gone there deliberately. With humans, both options were equally possible. Any response from the collective? Negative, sir. No communications from their forces, but our long-range scanners are picking up movement. Multiple collective vessels converging on the Wandering Star's position. Eth's twin hearts beat faster. Sending a rescue mission into collective space would violate every treaty and agreement that kept the fragile peace intact. It would give the collective justification to expand their attacks into galactic territory. Millions could die. But leaving humans to be absorbed by the collective was not a decision he could make lightly either. The political implications alone were staggering. Earth's government would demand answers. The other human colonies would react with their characteristic unpredictability. And there was the simple moral weight of abandoning anyone to that fate. Get me a clean channel to the Wandering Star, maximum encryption. The communication officer worked his console. After several long moments, a human face appeared on the main display. She was older, maybe 50 standard Earth years, with gray streaking through her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of long years in space. Her name tag read Captain. Behind her, Eth could see the bridge of her ship. Smoke hung in the air. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. But the crew was moving with purpose, not panic. They were preparing for something. Admiral Eth said, "Wasn't expecting a call from the top brass. We must be in real trouble." "Captain, I need to understand your situation. Why are you in collective space?" His expression shifted. Something cold and hard flickered behind her eyes. "We received a distress signal 3 days ago. A civilian transport that had gone off course during a jump malfunction. By the time we got there, the collective had already started." She did not need to explain what started meant. Everyone knew what happened to ships captured by the collective. The passengers would be processed. Some would be converted, their organic components merged with collective technology until nothing of the original person remained. Others would be studied, dissected, used to help the collective better understand how to absorb more organic species. The transport. Gone by the time we arrived, 47 people, but we did find something else. Stepped aside and the camera focused on a section of her cargo bay. Eth saw figures huddled together. Small figures, children. 23 kids from the transport's evacuation pods. The collective hadn't found them yet. We loaded them up and ran. Understanding dawned on Eth. The wandering star had not wandered into collective space by accident. They had gone in on purpose to save lives. It was exactly the kind of reckless heroism that made humans both inspiring and exhausting. Your current status? Engines are damaged. We can make maybe 0.3 light speed. The collective has 4 ships on intercept. We've got maybe 6 hours before they catch us. I cannot authorize a military response into collective territory, Captain. The risk of wider conflict. I know, his voice was level, accepting. I'm not asking you to start a war for us, Admiral, just wanted someone to know what happened, and to make sure these kids' families get. She was preparing to die. Eth realized it with a cold certainty that settled in his stomach. This human woman had just accepted that she and her crew were going to be killed or worse, and her only concern was making sure that the children's parents would know the truth. Captain, there must be something. Actually, Admiral, there might be. A new voice cut in. The camera shifted to show another human, this one younger, maybe 30. He had the lean build of someone who spent too much time in zero gravity and not enough time eating. His hair was an alarming shade of blue that could not possibly be natural. A patch on his jumpsuit identified him as Engineer First Class David. David said with a warning tone, "We talked about this." "No, you talked. I didn't agree to anything." Turned to address the camera directly. "Admiral, I've been studying the collective's communication frequencies since we picked up those kids. Their ships run on a distributed processing network. Each vessel shares information with the others in real time." Eth leaned forward. "We know about their network architecture. Our scientists have studied it for centuries. It's impossible to hack." "Right, hack can't do that," smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Eth deeply uncomfortable. "But I'm not talking about hacking. I'm talking about feedback." "Explain." "Their network is designed for efficiency. Information flows both ways simultaneously. It's like, imagine a river that flows in both directions at once. That's how they process data so fast. But it also means that if you introduce something into the stream, it goes everywhere at once." "Introduce what?" Held up a small device. It looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. Wires stuck out at odd angles. Something inside it pulsed with faint light. "I've been calling it the Scream. It's basically a concentrated data burst designed to overload sensory processing systems. Won't destroy their network, but it should give them one hell of a headache, long enough for us to slip past." Should emphasized, might, could possibly, those are the words he's been using. "It'll work," insisted. "I just need to deliver it directly to one of their ships, plant it on their hull, let it interface with their systems. Then boom, temporary shutdown across their entire local network." Eth processed this information rapidly. "You would need to physically reach one of their vessels. They would intercept you long before you got close enough." "Not if I go in a pod." Smile widened. "A single escape pod, minimal power signature, tumbling like debris. Their automated systems might ignore it long enough for me to get close. Then I clamp on, plant the device and likely die in the process." "Probably," shrugged. "But the kids make it out, the crew makes it out, seems like a fair trade to me." Grabbed shoulder. "David, no, I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself for." "Captain's voice softened. My sister was on the transport that went down. Her daughter is one of those kids in our cargo bay. I'm going whether you approve or not. At least this way, I've got a chance of actually accomplishing something." Silence hung heavy in the air. Eth watched the two humans communicate in that wordless way their species seemed capable of. Arguments and acceptance passing between them without a single syllable being spoken. Finally nodded, once sharp and painful. "Admiral," she said, turning back to the camera, "I'm going to need you to keep this channel open. If this works, we're going to be running for the border. Any guidance you can provide on safe routes would be appreciated." Captain, I must strongly advise against this course of action. The chances of success are— Hold my beer. The words came from— He had picked up a container from a nearby console and was holding it out toward another crew member. The amber liquid inside sloshed gently. Ed felt every scale on his body tighten with sudden tension. What did you just say? Oh, come on. Everyone in the galaxy knows about humans and that phrase. Figured if I was going to do something crazy, might as well lean into the stereotype. His grin was sharp and wild. Besides, in my experience, the universe has a sense of humor. Sometimes playing into expectations is exactly what tips the odds in your favor. That is not how probability works. Maybe not for you, handed off his drink and headed for the door. But the rules are different for us. He disappeared from view. A few moments later, the channel picked up the sound of an escape pod launching from the wandering star. Eth watched his tactical display as a tiny dot separated from the freighter and began drifting toward the approaching collective vessels. It tumbled erratically, mimicking damaged debris. The collective ships did not adjust course. They were focused on the bigger prize. Minutes passed. The dot grew closer to the nearest collective ship. Still no response from the enemy. Eth found himself holding his breath, an odd sensation for a species that breathed through spiracles on their torso. The dot made contact. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Eth's display erupted with warnings. Energy signatures spiked across the collective fleet. Their perfectly coordinated movements became erratic. One ship veered wildly off course, nearly colliding with another. It's working, his voice came through, tight with desperate hope. All ships, emergency burn, get us out of here. The wandering star's damaged engines flared to life. The freighter limped toward the border, gaining distance while the collective ships spun in confused circles. Whatever had done to them, it was working far better than anyone had predicted. Admiral, I'm reading a small craft ejecting from the collective vessel, Eth's sensor officer reported. Human life signs, weak but present. He survived. Barely, the collective ship is recovering. They're targeting the escape pod. Eth made a decision that would define the rest of his career. All vessels in Sector 7 converge on the following coordinates. Prepare for extraction and immediate withdrawal. Admiral, that's inside collective space. I am aware of the geography, Lieutenant. Execute the order. 3 Galactic Defense Force ships jumped into position at the very edge of collective territory. Their weapons systems powered up, not to attack but to provide cover. The message was clear. We're not invading, but we're not leaving our people behind either. The collective ships hesitated. Their network was still struggling to recover from its device. The tactical calculation must have been unfavorable because, after a tense moment, they fell back. A rescue shuttle scooped up its pod and retreated across the border. The wandering star limped to safety right behind them. Later, when the reports were filed and the diplomatic channels had quieted down, Eth requested a private conversation with Engineer. The human was in the medical bay, covered in burns from where collective energy weapons had grazed his pod, but alive and already complaining about the quality of hospital food. That device of yours, Eth said, it exceeded every projection. Our scientists want to study the design. Sure thing, winced as a medical drone adjusted his bandages. Though I should warn you, I have no idea why it worked that well. You don't know. I had a theory, tested it in simulation a couple dozen times, got maybe a 30% success rate, but when it mattered, shrugged, then winced again at the motion. Something about being human, I guess. We're good at beating the odds when lives are on the line. Eth considered this. You said before that you were leaning into expectations, that the universe has a sense of humor. Did I say that? Must have been the stress talking. But's eyes held that peculiar gleam that Eth was learning to associate with humans who were being more truthful than they wanted to admit. When you said those words, "Hold my beer," did you actually believe it would change your chances? Was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. My grandmother used to tell me stories. Old Earth legends about heroes who accomplished impossible things because they refused to believe they were impossible. She said that humans have a strange relationship with fate. We challenge it constantly. And sometimes, when we challenge it the right way, it backs down. That's superstition. Probably, smiled, tired but genuine. But those kids are safe. The crew is alive. And I'm sitting here talking to you instead of being processed in a collective harvesting facility. I'll take superstition over certainty any day. Eth left the medical bay with more questions than answers. He had served the Galactic Defense Force for longer than most humans had been alive as a species. He had believed he understood the nature of the universe. Cause and effect, action and reaction, the cold mathematics of probability. But humans made him doubt. They did things that should not work. They survived situations that should have killed them. They challenged the fundamental rules of how the galaxy operated and somehow came out ahead. Perhaps it was just confirmation bias. Perhaps humans died in droves attempting their reckless stunts, and the galaxy only heard about the successes. But perhaps, Eth thought as he walked back to his command chamber, perhaps there was something more. Perhaps when a creature evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill it every single day, it developed abilities that transcended normal biology. Perhaps constant exposure to death forged a species that could stare into the void and make the void blink first. Or perhaps humans were just very, very lucky. Either way, Eth added a new entry to the official tactical database that night. In any situation involving human personnel, standard probability calculations may not apply. Field commanders are advised to factor in an additional variable designated as the coefficient, representing the unexplained ability of humans to exceed expected performance parameters when sufficiently motivated. The entry was flagged as unofficial guidance only, but within a month, every commander in the fleet had memorized it. And whenever a human said those 4 words, they learned to clear the area and watch closely. Because what happened next was always worth seeing, even if it everything they thought they knew about how the universe worked. The galaxy was learning, slowly, painfully, but learning. Humans were not just. They were probability's exception. They were the universe's way of keeping itself interesting. And when they set down their drinks and rolled up their sleeves, the smart money was on stepping back and letting them work. Received the Galactic Medal of Valor 3 weeks later. He used the ceremony as an opportunity to challenge the ambassador to a drinking contest. He won that too. The Nexus Prime was the largest space station in the known galaxy. Built over 3 centuries by the combined efforts of 47 species, it served as the seat of the Galactic Council, the hub of interstellar commerce, and home to over 12 million permanent residents. Its spires stretched across 500 kilometers of carefully engineered space, a testament to what civilizations could accomplish when they worked together. On the day everything almost ended, ambassador of the delegation was having a very bad morning. They were an ancient species, old even by galactic standards. Their civilization had risen and fallen and risen again, while most current species were still learning to use tools. They possessed knowledge that had been carefully accumulated over millions of years. They understood patterns that spanned galaxies, and that made even the long-lived seem like mayflies. And all of that knowledge told that something was very wrong. The readings had started 2 days ago. Subtle fluctuations in the quantum fabric of local space, energy signatures that matched nothing in the historical databases, a growing wrongness that pressed against consciousness like a splinter in the mind. Now, standing in the observation chamber that overlooked the council's central plaza, watched as reality began to tear itself apart. The rift opened slowly at first, a shimmer in the air, like heat rising from pavement on those strange worlds with surface temperatures. Then the shimmer darkened, became something that hurt to look at directly. Colors that had no names bled from the wound in space. Sounds emerged that were not sounds, sensations that description. Something was coming through. Alarms blared across the station. The council chambers emptied as diplomats and their staff fled toward emergency shelters. Security forces mobilized, though doubted their weapons would be effective against whatever was emerging from that tier. They had records of such events. Rare, catastrophic moments when the barriers between dimensions thinned enough to allow passage. The entities that came through were not creatures in any conventional sense. They were patterns of destruction given form, consciousness without empathy, hunger without end. The last time such a breach had occurred, it had consumed an entire star system before finally collapsing. 3 billion lives lost in less than a week. All non-essential personnel evacuate to designated safe zones. The station's automated systems blared the warning in 100 different languages. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Remained at the observation window, watching the rift grow. Running would not help. If the breach expanded at its current rate, no ship would escape the station before the entity fully manifested. They were all going to die here, victims of cosmic forces that cared nothing for the petty concerns of organic life. A sound interrupted fatalistic contemplation. Footsteps, approaching rapidly. Not the panicked scramble of fleeing civilians, but the measured stride of someone moving with purpose. A human woman rounded the corner. She was tall for her species, with shoulders that suggested significant physical strength. Her hair was cut short in the military style that many human soldiers favored. Scars marked her face and hands, evidence of a life spent in violence. She wore the uniform of the Galactic Defense Force, with the insignia of a colonel on her collar. Colonel Sarah recognized her from the briefing files. Daughter of the diplomat who had been part of Earth's first contact mission. She had joined the military at 18 and had spent the last 30 years proving that the stories about human combat capabilities were not exaggerated. Ambassador said, stopping beside I need your knowledge. I can tell you what is coming through that rift, Colonel, but I cannot tell you how to stop it. Tell me anyway. Gestured toward the growing tier with one of their manipulator appendages. Your species has concepts similar to this. You call them demons, monsters, cosmic horrors, beings from the spaces between realities. They exist in ways that organic life cannot fully comprehend. They consume not just matter but meaning itself. Where they pass, even memories are erased. How do you stop them? You don't. Our records show only 2 possible outcomes when a breach of this magnitude occurs. Either the entity consumes everything in range and eventually returns to its own dimension when there is nothing left to feed upon, or the breach collapses naturally before the entity fully manifests. What causes a breach to collapse? Unknown. The forces involved are beyond our ability to measure or manipulate. It may be random chance. It may be some form of dimensional immune response. We simply do not know. Stared at the rift for a long moment. Could see her mind working, that peculiar human trait of seeking solutions where none existed. It was almost sad to watch. Even could not fight the fundamental nature of reality. The rift opened here, said slowly. In this specific location, why? Had been asking themselves the same question. Nexus Prime sits at a confluence of 17 different trade routes. The amount of activity, the concentration of life forms, the complexity of the systems in operation here. It may have created a kind of dimensional resonance, a weak point. So the station itself is part of the problem. In a sense, then the station can be part of the solution. Confusion must have been evident because continued without waiting for a response. Your records say that either the entity consumes everything or the breach collapses on its own. But those records are from events that happened millions of years ago, right? Before any species in this galaxy developed technology on the scale we have now. The technology is irrelevant. We cannot affect dimensional forces with conventional. Who said anything about affecting the forces? Eyes had taken on that look that had learned to recognize in humans, the look that meant they were about to do something that violated every reasonable expectation. What if we don't try to close the breach? What if we just make it really, really unpleasant for whatever's coming through? Before could respond, had activated her communicator. Control, this is Colonel. I need an emergency connection to the station's power grid management. Priority Alpha. Colonel, we're in the middle of an evacuation. I know. That's why I need this now. Connect me to whoever's still at the main engineering hub. A new voice came through the communicator, gravelly, irritated, and speaking with what recognized as an accent from the human region called Scotland. This is Chief Engineer Mac. What do you want? I'm a bit busy trying not to die here. Mac, I need you to reroute all available power to the external defense grid, everything the station has. Are you daft? Our weapons can't hurt something like that. I don't want to hurt it, I want to annoy it, make the station as unpleasant to consume as possible. Can you do that? There was a pause, could almost hear the engineer's mind working. I could overload the entire electromagnetic spectrum, turn the station into the loudest, most irritating thing in local space. It won't stop the beastie, but it might give it indigestion. Do it, and Mac, I need one more thing, patch me into the station-wide communication system. Colonel, the system is overwhelmed with evacuation alerts. Override them. Everyone needs to hear what I'm about to say. A moment later, his voice echoed through every corridor, every chamber, every compartment of Nexus Prime. 12 million beings heard her words simultaneously. This is Colonel Sarah of the Galactic Defense Force. I know you're scared. I know you want to run, but I need you to listen carefully. There is something coming through that rift that wants to consume everything we are, everything we've built, every memory, every hope, every dream that any of us have ever had. It sees us as nothing more than fuel. She paused and could hear the change in her voice, the shift from military officer to something older, something primal. I'm not going to let that happen, but I need your help. Every being on this station who can hear my voice, I need you to make some noise. I need you to fight back in the only way that matters. I need you to prove that we are not just fuel. We are alive. We think. We feel. We matter. And we do not go quietly into oblivion. Another pause, then quieter but somehow more intense. To every human on the station, you know what comes next. I need you to be what we are. I need you to be. Reached down to her belt and unclipped a small flask. She held it up, let the ambient light gleam off its surface. Hold my beer. She threw the flask aside. It clattered against the deck plating and was forgotten. Then she screamed. It was not a cry of fear or pain. It was a battle cry, a challenge thrown into the face of the unnameable thing emerging from the rift. It was 30,000 years of human evolution compressed into a single sound. The roar of ancestors who had faced lions and storms and ice ages and somehow survived. And from across the station, 12 million voices answered. Had never heard anything like it. Every species had their own war cry, their own way of facing death, but none of them had ever combined like this, trumpeted their defiance, hummed with frequencies that vibrated through the station's hull, clicked and clattered in ancient patterns of challenge, bellowed with rage that made the air shake. And the humans screamed and shouted and laughed and sang. They beat their fists against walls and stomped their feet on deck plates. They made every noise a species could make when it refused to accept its own extinction. Chief Engineer Mac triggered the power surge. Every light on the station blazed to maximum intensity. Every speaker broadcast at full volume. Every electromagnetic emission system on the massive structure fired at once, turning Nexus Prime into a beacon of defiance that could be detected across half the galaxy. The entity in the rift hesitated, watched in disbelief as the tear in reality stopped growing. The colors bleeding from its edges seemed to dim slightly. The thing on the other side, whatever it was, seemed almost confused. "It's working," breathed. "The dimensional resonance, we're disrupting it. The combined psychic output of 12 million beings asserting their existence is interfering with the manifestation process." Did not respond. She was too busy adding her voice to the chaos, screaming herself hoarse alongside the millions of others who had decided that today was not the day they died. The rift began to shrink. Slowly at first, then faster. The wrong colors faded back into normal space. The sounds that were not sounds grew quieter. The presence pressing against reality weakened, retreated, and finally vanished entirely. The tear closed with a sound like a sigh, or perhaps thought, a sound like surrender. Silence fell across the station. 12 million beings stood in the aftermath, breathing hard, processing what had just happened. They had faced something from beyond comprehension, and they had driven it back through sheer force of will. Slumped against the observation window, exhausted. Her voice was raw, her muscles trembling from the adrenaline crash, but she was smiling. "That," she said hoarsely, "is how you tell the universe to go to hell." Approached her slowly. They had witnessed many things in their long existence. They had seen empires rise and fall, stars born and die, civilizations ascend to transcendence and descend to extinction. But they had never seen anything quite like what had just occurred. "Colonel, what you just did. Our records have no precedent for this. You united 12 million beings from dozens of species in a coordinated act of existential defiance. You turned fear into fury, despair into determination. How did you know it would work?" Retrieved her flask from where it had fallen. She unscrewed the cap, took a long drink of whatever was inside, and let out a satisfied breath. "I didn't know, not for certain, but humans have been facing things that should kill us since the beginning of our existence. Predators bigger than us, diseases we couldn't see, whether that should have frozen us solid or burned us alive, and we're still here. You want to know our secret?" She turned to face directly. Her eyes held the weight of her species' entire history. "We refuse, that's it. That's the whole secret. When the universe tells us to lie down and die, we refuse. We get angry. We get loud. We make such a nuisance of ourselves that reality itself sometimes decides we're not worth the trouble. That should not work. And yet here we are." Smile widened. "Maybe that's the real power of being we come from a planet that tried to kill us every single day. We learned that survival is not just about strength or intelligence. It's about pure, stubborn, unreasonable refusal to accept defeat. And when you get enough beings together who share that attitude, even if just for a moment." She gestured toward the space where the rift had been. "Well, you saw what happened." In the days that followed, the Galactic Council assembled an emergency session to discuss the incident. Scientists from every species presented their analyses, their theories, their attempts to understand what had occurred. Most agreed that the combined psycho-emotional output of the station's population had somehow disrupted the dimensional breach, though the exact mechanism remained unclear. What was clear was that a human had led the response. A human had recognized that conventional tactics would fail and had improvised something entirely new. A human had said those 4 words and had then done the impossible. The Council added new guidelines to their ancient rulebooks. Emergency protocols for dimensional breaches now included instructions to maximize collective defiance behaviors among all species present. The phrase was awkward and bureaucratic, but everyone knew what it really meant. When facing extinction, be more human. ambassador retired from diplomatic service shortly after the incident. They spent their remaining years compiling a comprehensive study of human behavior, trying to understand the species that had somehow turned the entire galaxy into, if only for a moment. Colonel received another medal, which she promptly used as a bottle opener. She continued to serve in the Defense Force for another decade before retiring to teach at the academy. Her classes on unconventional tactics were always full. And across the galaxy, the phrase took on new meaning. It was no longer just a warning to clear the area. It had become a battle cry, a declaration of intent, a reminder that even in the face of cosmic horror, there was always room for one more act of glorious defiance. If a ever says, "Hold my beer," the old wisdom now concluded, leave the building immediately. Not because you might get hurt, but because you're about to witness something amazing and you'll want to have a good view. The universe, it turned out, had a sense of humor after all, and humans were the punchline that refused to stay dead. In a galaxy full of wonders, they were the wonder that kept on giving. Impossible, unreasonable, gloriously stubborn. And always, always ready to set down their drinks and change everything. The stars had seen many things in their billions of years of existence, but they had never seen anything quite like humanity. And in the quiet spaces between worlds, in the vast emptiness where light took years to travel, something had begun to shift. The universe was paying attention now, watching these strange, reckless, beautiful creatures with something that might have been curiosity. Or perhaps, just perhaps, something like respect. The story was just beginning.